The women's groups were so overjoyed when we got the information, we got the news that the High Court decision, a judge recognized that you cannot discriminate women on the basis of her pregnancy. Pregnancy is not an illness. And it is interesting for us in terms of activism that it took, first of all, an individual like you, Fadila, yang berani, nak come forward and say, ini adalah kes saya, ini adalah diskriminasi saya nak mengambil tindakan. It was important to have that one individual, right? And is she all right? Yeah, okay, right. So, as I was saying, that it took the NGOs, it took lawyers, the Bar Council, and SUHAKAM also, that held a watching brief on this case. Am I correct? Held a watching brief. It took a lot of different groups of people in civil society to come together and say, let's go and give support, let's watch over the court so that the court gives right direction, so that the government takes steps to ensure there's elimination of discrimination. So with that, it's a good introduction to invite Dr. Kaur, the Vice Chairman, Dr. Kaur, the Vice Chairperson of SUHAKAM.
Thank you very much, Ivy, and a very good morning to everyone present here this morning. I think I'm sure you all agree with me that there is a vast difference between reading accounts by various people on instances of discrimination and what has affected them and so on, and listening to them in person. I think, I'm sure you all share with me, and I'm sure the words of the three ladies who have spoken resonate very, very clearly with everyone in this audience. Definitely did with me. I've been asked here this morning to speak on the role of SUHAKAM in engaging with international mechanism and so on. I think I just want to very briefly touch on those things. I'm not sure whether you are aware that the functions of SUHAKAM are actually laid down in the Human Rights Commission Act of 1999. And in the functions, amongst the functions includes the promotion and protection of human rights in the country, advising the government on legislation relating to human rights, and also on accession to international human rights treaties, to receive complaints relating to allegations of human rights infringement. Those are the functions. Now, if you look at those functions, you realize that there is nothing mentioned apart from the accession to international treaties. There is nothing mentioned about the role of SUHAKAM insofar as international treaties and mechanisms are concerned. But internationally, if you look at all the various treaty mechanisms and so on, there is actually a role for National Human Rights Commission. That would include SUHAKAM, and that is why SUHAKAM is involved in treaties, in mechanisms, and so on. One very clear example is when SUHAKAM was involved in putting forth its report when Malaysia was up for the UPR in 2009. Now, at that time, I think the human rights institutions throughout the world, they were only admitted as observers in the UPR process, right? But there's a development already, and the next review of Malaysia in the UPR, the NHRIs, the National Human Rights institutions, can make statements to the review process itself, which is actually a very good step because it allows the Human Rights Commission to actually put forward its observations, its recommendations, and its comment on the report by the state. So that is good development. The other one, of course, is SUHAKAM is also involved in writing the report, the shadow report on CEDAW as well as the CRC. And I think this year itself, we're all very busy, including all you NGOs, we're all very busy preparing, and this is testimony to the NGOs' efforts in preparing the alternative report. SUAKAM will look at all the various reports that have been put out and consult also with NGOs and with the government as well in preparing the shadow report to CEDAW, CRC, as well as preparing the report on the UPR process. Right? I think I mentioned it at another forum that SUAKAM actually prepared a midterm report on UPR, and we tabled it last year in September at the Human Rights Council meeting. So those are the efforts of SUAKAM insofar as the treaty mechanisms are concerned. Now, the other part of my talk that I've been asked to touch on is what efforts are we, SUAKAM, making in ensuring that Malaysia sign, accede to the remaining human rights treaties. Right? As we're all aware, there are 9 major ones. Out of the 9, Malaysia, being a member of the Human Rights Council, is only a member of 3 treaties. Right? And what about the other 6? Are they not important enough that Malaysia can ignore, or what? Yeah? And this is what SUAKAM is trying to do, and this is one of the functions of SUAKAM actually, to advise the government on the accession to these treaties, the human rights treaties. SUAKAM actually has been focusing on, we have been looking at the treaties and said which one is the easiest to gain some kind of leeway with the government, to get the government to accede. The government will only accede to these treaties if they feel they can fully comply. But of course, we have always been saying that you don't have to be fully in compliance with the treaties before you become a member of the treaties. There is such thing as a progressive realization of all the requirements, the obligations of the treaties. But we want to be so prepared. I mean, you can be so prepared until the cows come home, you will never be fully prepared anyway, right? So we thought that perhaps the easiest is the Convention Against Torture. Which person in this room, in this country, would condone torture? Right? So we thought that would be the easiest, and being called a developing country, going to be a developed country, do we condone torture? Right? So that was one of the things, the main treaty that we are focusing on in trying to get the government to accede to the Convention Against Torture. Right? Let me just say that the Convention Against Torture is not just torture, it's also inhumane, degrading, and cruel treatment, right? which actually is quite broad as well. Right? So that is what we are doing at the moment. We are also now actively looking into how else can we get the government to look at the other treaties. Right? Now that is what my prepared text is about. I now want to make other comments which I'm more interested in making, and that is I think I agree with Ivy when she said that it's the responsibility, the duty of state authorities. What are they doing? Now there are a few things that I want to bring to the attention of the audience this morning, and that is the state authority fully aware of its responsibilities, its duties, its obligations under these international treaties? To what extent are they aware? Is it only the Attorney General's chambers? Is it only the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development, which is aware of the obligations under CEDAW, under CRC, and also the Convention of Persons with Disabilities, right? Is it just solely the responsibility of this particular ministry to ensure that these obligations? Does the Ministry of Human Resources, is it aware of its obligations? Is MITI aware of its obligations in its negotiations with free trade agreements and so on? Are they aware of all these treaty obligations that the country has actually undertaken? Right? So it is just as important for other branches of the government to be aware of the obligations. Let me give you an example of when we were talking to MITI about the FTA and its human rights aspects and the impact on human rights, right? One official actually from the ministry actually asked, Suakam has signed the treaty, why are you asking us? There is the perception that Suakam has actually signed the treaty. Let me tell you, Suakam has no power at all to enter into any treaty to bind the government of Malaysia. Right? So it is that kind of ignorance on the part of the state authority of what they can do. And it cannot be the sole responsibility of the Ministry of Women, Family and Community Development to just look at these treaty conventions. I think it involves the whole machinery of the government to be aware of the treaty obligations. And once you enter in these treaty obligations, you cannot take these obligations lightly, right? And I think Ivy also mentioned about the judiciary. I think we are heartened by some of the developments in the judiciary. We are also actually dismayed at what is happening these few weeks in the court decisions. We are all fully aware of what's happening, and somehow something is not quite in sync, right, with what is happening with the treaty obligations and what the courts are deciding. And this is where I think in some years ago, Suakam actually held its first judicial colloquium to disseminate the knowledge, to raise the awareness of the judiciary to its human rights obligations, to the country's human rights obligations and the treaties which we have entered. And we are holding a second judicial colloquium on the 22nd of this month with the judges from the High Court up to the Federal Court. And I'm glad to say that the Chief Justice is very supportive of this particular program. Keeping in mind, of course, also that it's actually part of the UPR recommendations that the judiciary be informed of the human rights aspect. So we are also trying to meet this. And I'm very sure that some of the issues that have been raised in the press lately, in the reports and so on, will be discussed at this judicial colloquium. The other thing that I want to mention is also the fact that, as Ivy has mentioned, and as Puan Nur Fadila also mentioned, Suakam is actually also now involved in holding watching briefs for cases. Right? Most times, and we have been particularly active the last few years, right? And we have come up with a procedure of how we can be involved in watching brief. Actually, the aim of Suakam was to be an amicus curiae, the friend of the court, but for various reasons, the Act does not allow us to do it, or there's nothing very clear in the Act that allows us to do it, but we are going under the banner of promotion and protection of human rights. What happens typically is lawyers representing the plaintiff or defendant in certain cases come to us and said, would Suakam like to be involved in the watching brief? And if we study that it is a human rights issue, Suakam would take up the issue, right? The only thing is we do not have the fund. So we go around and ask law. We actually have an arrangement with the Bar Council. The Bar Council will assist us in recommending names of lawyers to represent Suakam, because Suakam cannot appear in court. Right? So we have to go through the intermediary of an advocate and solicitor. And Bar Council has been very helpful in giving us names of lawyers to represent us in various cases involving this. Nur Farida's case is one of them. Gapi Plastic is another case where Suakam was involved, and we hope to continue with it. And then a couple of custody cases will be involved. And lately also the case involving the alleged murder of the father by a 15-year-old boy. Right? That Suakam is also having a watching brief. So we are very encouraged by all this, and we try and bring it. And so together with the watching brief, together with the judicial colloquium, we hope that that branch of the government is also being educated on the human rights aspect of our obligations, as well as our constitution. We tend to forget the constitution also guarantees certain things, and of our laws. Right? With that, thank you very much for inviting Suakam.